So a little more about me. My name is Jerry Bauerkemper, and I'm 66. I'll be 67 years old in a couple of months. And I've spent the last 38 years working specifically with gamblers and their families. So I think I know what I'm talking about, but I stayed at a Holiday Inn last night, so I'm okay. I currently live in Galveston Island, Texas, and every morning when we get up, right, this morning it's 83 degrees and there's 87% humidity. So when I get out, I tend to sweat, and so there's always a burden on my antiperspirant. But that wasn't true yesterday. It was not even challenged yesterday as I sat in this room freezing to death. So I'm hoping it's better today, and I want you to know that I wore a jacket just in case. Yesterday I did not. So a couple of things about what's going on. I want to talk about what's been going on in the last 35 or 40 years in working with gambling and the field, and what's been happening and all the challenges we faced and all the successes we've had and all the changes we've made. And so, how many of you have been around since the 1980s working with gamblers? Anyone besides me? A couple of you? Good for you. Thank you. And I want to thank you for putting up with with all the changes that we've had to go through and all the struggles we've had to go through. Moving from 1980, when we first got in the DSM, and we were an impulse disorder, and it was not otherwise defined. And so we were right next to trichotillomania, and okay, it's working in my favor today. So let's talk about what we are going to talk about today, and we'll try to get this through. And here's the thing: as I go through this, if you have anything to add, please add it. Okay? I'm not a lecturer. I'm interested in, if you remember something that happened that I don't have written down here, like, just say it. You don't even have to raise your hand, because there's just a few of us here. We're going to talk about what happens in the demographics between people entering treatment in 1998 and the present. And as a consultant for the state of Iowa, I have the ability to get some of the data that all the people that have come into treatment for the past 20 or 30 years. Now, they didn't start gathering data until about 1998. They started treatment in 1986. So that should tell you something. We didn't even think that data was important when we first started, okay? And now we think data is everything, and so we have 14 pages of intake just to get the demographics so that we know what gamblers look like and act like. And we're going to talk about the age ranges and the percentages and the games they played and the debt they came into and how that's changed. And we're also going to look at the research that we've had and how that's developed our treatment process and what's different between when it first started working in the field and where we are today. And then we're going to look into the future. We're going to take a little snapshot of the future, see what we think is going to happen. I know Dr. Fong talked a little bit about that yesterday, so we'll talk a little bit more about that today. But I wanted to give you a history of what's been going on here. How many of this is, I know you asked yesterday, how many of you, this is the first time you've been to a gambling training? Good for you. I appreciate it. A little bit about how I got in the field. In 1986, there was a grant put out by the state of Iowa after I testified to the legislature that we should, if we're going to have legalized gambling in Iowa, we should probably treat the people who are suffering and afflicted. And they agreed. And they said 1% of all the lottery revenue would be given to treatment for gambling and rehabilitation. And so I as a treatment director for substance use. I applied for a grant and I got it. And so we started working with people who had gambling problems in 1987 was when when the grants came up. Iowa was one of the first states, if not the first state, to have treatment that was state-sponsored and state-run. And that's been a blessing and a curse. And let me tell you what the blessings and the curses are. When the act to allow Native American gaming to have their own gaming, as long as they had a compact with the state, that was done in 1988. It became a states' rights issue. Okay, so there's no federal dollars for this because it's a states issue. That's good news because each state is responsible and can take care of its own people. The bad news is that research doesn't happen on a state level and how it usually happens on a federal level. Research doesn't, regulations are harder on a state level than on a federal level. And all of those things that SAMHSA does and sends block grants down and everything like that, we don't get any of those. And so each state has been asked to fund its own treatment, and many states have decided they don't want to. And so one of the difficulties is that from 1986 to 2024, not every state in the union provides treatment for gambling. This is one of the states that does, and I thank God for that. But let me suggest to you that you are late coming to the party compared to several other states, and we were all looking at you like, really? Why don't you have treatment? And because they don't do it every year. I mean, Nebraska, we have a unicameral, which we're the only unicameral, so we meet every year, but only for 3 months. But we passed it pretty much, we passed it in 92. So let's go on. I want to thank Katie B., my boss, and Eric Preuss, my previous boss, who are the data gatherers for the state of Iowa. They are the people who run the programs in Iowa, and they allowed me to get this information. So let's talk about the industry first. If you get nothing else out of this process, let me say right up front, if you want to know what gamblers are going to look like when they come into your office in the next 10 years, look to the industry. What they do affects the people that come into treatment. And let me give you an example. Starting in 2018, sports gambling was approved in many, many states. And the number of sports gamblers that are coming into treatment is rising exponentially every year. Now, we'll talk later about what's on the horizon and what they see happening, and so that maybe we can prepare instead of react. So let's look at the Las Vegas casinos because we're here. Do you remember, any of you remember the Las Vegas casinos in the 60s, 70s, early 80s? Smoke-filled rooms. They had table games, very few slot machines, very few one-armed bandits, men, two types of women. One was asking if you wanted drinks, and the other was saying cigars, cigarettes, tipperillos. There weren't a lot of women in casinos at that point. Mostly men, mostly table games. And then what happened? Anybody tell me what happened in the early 80s? Well, I have a theory. There's this guy, he's sitting in his room, he's an accountant. He's got a little hat on, and he's crunching the numbers, and he finds out that the 3 or 4 or 10 slot machines was making more money, percentage-wise, than the table games. And he says to the CEO of the company, boy, we should probably add a few of these. And what happened? And now 80% of the floor is slot machines, and 20% of the floor is table games. And so When that changed, what else changed? The demographics of the people coming into treatment. So that's our history. So in the 1980s, there's cash was king. You couldn't go into a casino without cash. Okay? Now what do we have? You can put in many venues, you can put your debit card or your cash card or whatever it is right into the process, and you don't ever have to touch money. Okay? So we've changed that. And what impact did that have on our gamblers? Say it out loud. More debt, faster debt, easier debt. Because if you don't see the money, you can't, and don't feel the money, it becomes almost like play money. So, in the 80s, sports betting was mostly local bookies. You remember the bookies? Anybody who have to ever work with bookies? When I grew up, all of my uncles were bookies. Go figure. And most of them own bars. Oh, hey, they happen to go together. And so I was used to talking to and dealing with bookies. And when I first started working with people that had gambling problems, working with the bookies was simple for me. I just say, Bob, I really need you to give this guy a break here. Okay, don't take any more bets, and we're going to give you X, Y, Z a week to pay it off. Da 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 da. And they would say, okay, nephew, I will do that. So it was pretty easy for me. And I learned how to do that because my uncles would say, okay, well, we'll work on it. Okay? So, but now, what have we got now? We've got legalized sports betting. Legalized. And so you go downstairs and you bet. And even more, you go online and bet. And the speed of the game goes faster. So here we go. The racetracks. Many tracks. There were a lot of racetracks. Remember all the racetracks? They were everywhere. And now, where are they? Mostly gone. And they have like 3 races a year so they can simulcast. And so they have these horses that are ready for the glue factory running. And then they get their license to simulcast. So that's changed. And all of that changed the horse bettors. In addition to that, what else happened to the horse bettors in many states? What's that?
Off-track betting.
Off-track is mostly East Coast, but they allowed casinos in the horse tracks. So now, and they did it to, quote, end quote, support the horse racing industry. I was just in Kentucky several months ago, and I'm driving down the road where Secretariat was and all those beautiful, beautiful horse farms, and they have casinos and horse tracks, and they support, one supports the other. Because people don't they don't bet horses as often anymore. And we don't have a lot of horse track bettors that come into treatment. Anybody worked with a horse track bettor before? 1 or 2 of you? Not a lot, okay? In 38 years, I've probably worked with maybe 10 horse track bettors. They don't know we exist. They didn't think, because of it takes so long for them to come to end their resources, they just didn't come in. And when they did come in, they didn't stay very long. So we also had poker rooms, and now we have pokers in the casinos. We've changed that, especially on the East Coast. They still have. What else is new since the 1980s to now? Yeah, it's all. We have this goofy thing called esports, and I'm going to show you pictures of esports right now. Thank you, Saul. Thank you. I appreciate it. Um, Saul lives in Texas, and I live in Texas, so we know each other. Sorry. So now you can sports bet or e-bet. I think you can e-bet on sports. And we talked about that yesterday. The two people from Nebraska, which are also very, very good friends of mine, they talked about the fact that now colleges recruit people who are sports players and gamers, you know, Fortnite and all those things. I don't get it. For college, and they have professionals, and you can bet on it. And in New York City, they have a channel specifically for esports. So you can watch it 24 hours a day. Does that scare anybody but me? Yeah. How do they bet on it? Well, it's you have a team, and teams play teams, and then you can bet on individuals, and individuals whether or not they do well. So that, let's say they have one of these shoot 'em up games where you take your gun and you shoot somebody, okay? And you have a team, and your team is to finish ahead of the other team. Or you can be against the other team, and you can have a battle against each other. There are lots of ways which they bet. And I'll be real honest, I don't bet it. So, you know, what, Jeremy, anything you want to add? Okay, thanks. Boy, you just threw me under the bus. Thanks, appreciate that. So we have esports, and if you go into the Luxor, they have an esport game place where it has, several thousand square foot where you can game. And you can game against the house now. And I don't know how that works because I've never been in there. Because every time I go, the door is closed and I can't get there. So, and I don't know how to work my way around that. But they also have sports betting in kiosks. Another one of these kiosks, and you don't even have to go into the sports book area anymore. You can actually just do it from the hallway. Okay? So I have a gambler, a sports gambler on my caseload right now, and he is he's a person who did not want to show his face in the sports book. He thought someone would recognize him. So if he had to go to the sports book, he would put a hood on and walk in there and make his bet and walk out. And then the state of Iowa, in its infinite wisdom, and the state of Nebraska, not the state of Nebraska, the state of Iowa, decided that they would allow people to bet online as long as they were in the state. They had geofencing. You know what geofencing is? Geofencing is basically along whatever line you draw, you can't bet outside that. Okay, you have to bet inside that. Well, the state of Iowa decided that anything inside the state of Iowa you could sports bet. So he lives in Lincoln, and so he would drive 45 minutes just to get on the other side of the river to Iowa, and then make his sports bet, and then go back 45 minutes. And if he lost, he would go back and bet some more. So he might do this 2 or 3 or 4 times a day. Okay? So at the end, yeah, go ahead, Jeremy. Oh. Now it gets worse. Okay, so sports betting is new, esports betting is new, and as the industry has changed, and moved. We now find that the younger people don't attend the casinos nearly as much as us old people, okay? And I don't mean you, I mean me, okay? People of my generation are casino goers. We go bricks and mortar, we go there. We get in buses and we go there. And we eat the buffet because, that's cheap. It used to be cheap meals, not anymore. But we go there and we spend the day, and it's part of our entertainment package. Young people don't go nearly as often, and the bricks and mortar are smaller now as far as people attending. Young people are using their apps to get on, okay? Now, one of the difficulties of that process is we're not on all those apps. The treatment people aren't on all that apps. We're not nearly as good as the industry at social apps and social contacts. I was on the board of directors for the National Council, and they wanted me to reapply and come back, and I said no. And they said, why not? I said, because you need someone who knows about online apps and how to do social media, and that's not Jerry. My goal is to move to a third world country, an emerging country where they don't even have internet. And I would if my bride would let me. And so having said all that, I spent an inordinate amount of time Googling, because that's really all I know how to do. But my children and your children and your grandchildren know all kinds of things to do. And they are good at apps. And they are good at finding information on the internet. But as an entity, the problem gambling world, we're not very good at it. How many of you see a lot of online advertisements for help for treatment? I think Nevada does a much better job than most states. I blame you completely for not training me. But most states don't do a very good job, and even the Nevada Council could do a whole lot better. But we're behind the curve again. We're always behind the curve with treatment, with the industry. We're always behind the curve. We're reacting instead of responding. Okay? So let's talk about the DSM. In 1980, the DSM was first introduced, gambling was first introduced into the DSM. 1980. So this disorder has been in the books for a long time. I remember when I first started working, I had a person who needed some inpatient residential care because they just couldn't. They had a mental health issue and they had a gambling issue, and they needed to go. And I tried to get him into the state facility, and the psychiatrist, and this was 1987, said to me, "We don't do gambling here. It's not in the DSM." And I said, "Well, yes, it is." And he spent 30 minutes trying to tell me that it wasn't there. And so I finally showed him, and he said, "Well, we don't do that here. We don't do treatment for gambling here." I said, "It's in the DSM, and you're a psychiatrist." And he says, "I don't care. We don't do it here." That's where we've come from. We didn't have psychiatrists, psychologists. We didn't even have social workers that believed that gambling was an issue. And in 1957, there was a study, a nationwide study, a prevalence study on gambling, and they found that there were no gamblers in the country. No, they said 0%. And that's when Gamblers Anonymous was founded. So we've come a ways from 0% in 1957 to now. Shortly, about 20 years ago, 20-some years ago, DSM-4 came out. And they started to look at, it was still an impulse disorder, but they were starting to look at the changes that the research was telling us, okay? And they started to believe that there were levels of severity. People could come in at an earlier point, but they weren't coming in at an earlier point. They just could, okay? And they also started talking about there were different pathways. When we first started, Dr. Custer, and he was the person that first trained me in the 1980s, he had a book out, When Luck Runs Out, and he believed that everyone was either an action gambler or an escape gambler. Action gamblers were sports gamblers and horse players and poker players, and escape gamblers were bingo players and slot players and scratch-off players, okay? And he put them basically into categories of either you were gambling to escape problems or you were a thrill seeker, okay? And so when the 1980s was around, that's all we had. But now we have, and the DSM-4 came out, it was still an impulse disorder, but we started to think, this looks a lot like other disorders, like substance use disorder. And all the criteria were mimicked after substance use disorders, but it was still an impulse disorder. And we were confused as a group. Why would it look like substance use, and be an impulse disorder? Well, it turns out gamblers were pretty impulsive, okay? We were an impulsive group, and so we had spent a lot of time showing our impulsiveness, and so that's what was seen, okay? So we went to the DSM-5 about 10 years ago, which is the current version, and it was extremely controversial because it was moved into the addiction disorders. The first addiction that was not substance related, okay? And it took out the criminal part of it, having committed illegal acts, because they decided that, in their infinite wisdom, that the criminal act was a severity issue, not a sign or a symptom, okay? But what happened was when we moved into the issue of addiction, our state people said, oh, addiction? Well, then we'll just fold it into our SUD programs. And so we went from having our own issue to now we were a subset of the SUD people. And how many of you are SUD people? And you've gone through 30 to 60 hours of gambling training. There are a lot of people out there that haven't. And so they know a lot about SUD and they're pretty good at it. And there are some similarities and some differences. And so what happened is the numbers started falling. The gamblers didn't come in to an SUD program. They didn't have an SUD problem. So our numbers in Iowa went from 5 to 6 to 700 people to 70. So we have learned over the past 10 years that it's a subset. It has its own signs and symptoms, and it can be folded into SUD, but you have to be trained and you have to be cross-trained. So we've learned that. Okay, so this is the DSM-3 and the DSM-4, and you'll see, and I don't want to go over that a lot, but you'll see that forgeries, thefts, things like that were embezzlements. And the reason for that was because a lot of our people that came in had committed crimes because the severity level when they come in is they're pretty severe. We were getting them, and I with all due respect, at the level of almost a street drunk. A street drunk says things like, well, I don't have a problem because I don't drink as often as Bob over here because he drinks every day or every hour, and I only drink every 2 hours. And that's what the gamblers were looking at when we first came in. I don't have a problem because I'm not as severe as the last person. And they were coming in very severe cases, and our treatment success was abysmal. We didn't do a very good job. In fact, today, in 2024, if you take all the states and you get all their data together and you add it all together, our success rate in working with people who have gambling problems, 19%. 19% success. And the reason for that is because we're taking an SUD model of abstinence, and we're not taking a take them where they are, and some people, can do different successes. In fact, let me give you a story. I had a guy that I was working with for 4 or 5 years. He was a scratch-off player. He was 65 years old, 66. He was disabled. And he was I get my Medicare check, I get my Social Security check every month, and 2 days later, I'm broke kind of guy. Off scratch-offs, okay? So we worked on it, He said he wanted to stop doing this, and his sister wanted to stop doing this, and so stop doing this because he kept borrowing money from her, and she was on Social Security too, and they were both broke. And so they bring him in, and he's working on it, and he would stop gambling for about 30 to 60 to 70 days, and then he would gamble again. And I was working on it. What is going on that you keep doing this do-overs? And here's what happens. He was on a lot of heart medications, and he was diabetic, and he would go to the pharmacy. And on the way to the pharmacy, he would see those little kiosks at the service counter, and it would say, lottery sold here, and they would say, Mary from Dubuque won $80,000, okay? And he would go, and there he was there. And so it took a long time for him to not, because he had to have his medications. I mean, clearly, without medications, he wasn't going to live. So the first thing I did, of course, was don't go into that grocery store. Well, it turns out every grocery store in his town sold lottery tickets, so that one didn't work. So then we started having him go to the back of the store and all the way around so he wouldn't see, and that helped. But finally, what really helped was he would go to the senior center, and they had 10-cent bingo. 10-cent bingo. And so he would play bingo twice a week, and he would spend 40 cents. And that satisfied his gambling urge. So did he stop? No. He spends 80 cents a week. And sometimes he would win, and he would put it in one of his pill bottles, and he'd show me every week, look, it's full. Yeah, I have a second one. And then, oh, this one's half full. And so he was successful only when we decided not to try the abstinence model, when we tried to actually take him where he was. So, but he also had committed several crimes, and the thing that what he wanted to do with his money, which is typical of us old people, he wanted to make sure he had a funeral. And so we budgeted his money so every month he would buy into his funeral, to his casket and his cemetery plot, etc. And he got it all paid off before he died. And I'm guessing the second he paid it off, no. But that's, that's the difference between our 1980s model and our 2024 model. And that is that we begin the process of seeing people where they are and not using an abstinence-based model all the time. So, okay, so let's move on, if I can make this move on. Okay, so here's the DSM-5. You've seen that before. If you haven't seen that before, look it up. It's on, you can Google it, 312.31, 312.31. And I won't go over that, but you'll notice that there's only 9 criteria now. There was 10, now there's 9. And you needed 5 before, you only need 4. And we are finding that more people are coming in with 5 and 6 than 8 and 9. So we are actually moving the process from the most severe to a little less severe, what we call moderate. Okay, and how are we doing that? Well, we have to thank the councils, the National Council, and the industry for that. Because for those of you that were downstairs last night, if you went to a slot machine, right on every slot machine it says, if you have a problem, call 800-GAMBLER. If you're at the ATM machine, there's a brochure. See, I do research. Field research. So I go and I pull out this, and there's a brochure on the ATMs. And if you go to the ATMs and you start money, they will offer you an option of talking to the counselors in Nevada. And that's happening around the country. A lot of casinos are like that. A lot of the industry is like that. They are allowing and promoting the 800 number. Now, add that to the NFL, the NHL, pro soccer, pro basketball. Which one isn't? There's one that isn't right yet. Is it hockey? No, it's not hockey. I think it might be soccer. They all have commercials and signs that say, if you've got a problem, call. So part of that, we owe to the industry for helping us get the word out. So when we say, when the council says we're neutral and we'll bring anybody to the table that wants to help us, that's true. We'll bring anybody to the table that wants to help us. Anybody. If you are good at networking and getting people, getting the word out, talk to the director. He would love to help. He would love your help. Okay, so we're moving on. We also, on the DSM, we really added severity, mild, moderate, severe. And Dr. Fong talked a little bit about the problem with that and giving that away to people. As if you say, well, you only answered 4 or 5, so you're a mild case. Well, I'll come back when I'm more severe. Because I've had that happen before. But what we are looking at is we're starting to, at least at the state of Iowa, say if they're coming in as a 4 or 5, what is their outcome? What is their chance of successful outcome? If they're 6 or 7, what are their chance for outcome? We're starting to measure our success rates based on those kinds of severity issues. And I think that's a good idea because we're going to get to know how to work with people and what our lengths of stay for each one of those, average lengths of stay, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this is a good idea to put severity in the process. But if we look at the past, Dr. Custer, who wrote the book and who did the early trainings in the 1980s, he based all of his information on 40-year-old white males. Look around the room. Anybody, are there any 40-year-old white males? Yes. But as you look around, people aren't 40 white males, veterans, many of who had PTSD, and that's who he was defining as gamblers, and that's how we were supposed to look at gamblers. Action escape, we talked about that. And then in 2002, Leonauer and Blazinski, they come up with a thing called pathways. How many of you use pathways in your diagnosis and your assessment now? I would recommend highly that you use the pathways model. And the pathways model is one of that looks like this. There are 3 types of gamblers that come in, not action escape, but behaviorally conditioned, emotionally conditioned, and antisocial impulsive. Okay? So behaviorally conditioned are the people who they walked into the casino and they had no mental health issues, they weren't narcissists, they weren't anything like that. They just got introduced to the game and it just took them. They don't have any other reasons other than that's who they are. Okay? And the emotionally conditioned gamblers, they are people with previous mental health issues, current mental health issues, and concurrent gambling issues. Okay? So would you treat a person that came in just because the same way, a person that just came in and just had a single gambling issue versus a person who has multiple co-occurring issues, would you treat them the same? Probably not. You probably shouldn't. One is more behavioral, and you can do some cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's usually pretty effective. And the other has a lot of other issues that you got to work on, and you got to work with. And it might include some referrals, and you would not necessarily do the same type of therapy with them. And then there's the antisocial impulsivist. They're your basic, I'm in charge of my own treatment kind of people. I know what's going on. I'm pretty good at this. A lot of sports gamblers are like that. Not all sports gamblers are like this, but they are your traditional action gambler. Okay. I have 3 on my caseload right now, sports gamblers, and because I only have a caseload of 3, because the person that I work with says, you're the only person I know that knows how to work with sports gamblers. Would you work with them? So every sports gambler comes in the door, I get, right? So I get 3 of them. I have 3 of them right now. And all of them are very, very impulsive, and they are all very directive in their own treatment. And so if you say, I need you to do this, they'll say, no, I think I need to do this. They're their own directive in their treatment. And so you would approach them differently than you would the other 2. And so as we look at this new form that came out in 2002 and has been updated several times, 2010, 2017, we now have a better idea when a person walks in the door exactly how to treat them. Okay? We do not treat them the same way, nor should we treat them the same way. In 1980, that's all we did. We had one way and one way only. And we had mostly sports gamblers that were coming in, or horse track players, so we were really good at just doing that one way. But times have changed. We also have changed the qualifications for gambling counselors. We've moved from high school education to you all really need to be really, really well educated. And for those of you that are master's degree or above, you're in the top 13% educated people in the country, and we need you. Because we have a lot of people that have multiple issues and things that you are trained on. But that wasn't the case in 1980. The first person I hired in 1980 was a lived experience person. And just so you know, I had to terminate him because he gambled with his client. We weren't quite ready. We didn't have a lot of regulations back then that you had to be 2 years off the bet, and then you had to have training, and you had to have this, and you had that. We didn't have that. We didn't have anybody in the country that knew anything about gambling, so we took people from GA and tried to and some of them weren't necessarily a good recovery, as I witnessed. I'm the only person I know that's been sued as a gambling. I was the director of the program, and they sued me because I should have known they were gambling. So Anyway, here's the pathways model. I just have that in front of you. It looks like this. And then this is the Custer V chart that we all used to use. Looks a lot like the old Jelinek chart, doesn't it? For those of you that are old enough to know the Jelinek chart. Do you guys still use the Jelinek chart in your SUD? No, we don't use this either. Now, here's the other part of that. You see, on the other side, the recovery side, some of that's still valid. Some of that is still valid. But we don't use the critical phase, the hopelessness phase. We don't use that anymore. We use the Leonauer stuff, the pathways model. Okay? And I would recommend that some of Dr. Custer's stuff is relevant, especially for sports gamblers and horse track players. But Blazinski and Leonauer stuff is a lot more valid, okay? And it's been researched. And it came out of Rutgers, okay? I guess I gotta trust Rutgers University. So, screenings have changed. What time does this end? How long do I go here? Okay. Okay. So when we first started, we used Custer's little screening, his V chart as a screening tool. But since then, we've come up with a lot more screenings. And we went through a South Oak screening, and then we have the NOD screening. We have the LIBET screen, which is a 2-question. Right now, we're using the brief biosocial gambling screen as a screener, and the severity index. We are using different screeners than we used to. And I don't know if this is true in the state of Nevada, but in the state of Iowa, every person who comes in with a mental health or an SUD problem also has to be screened by the brief biosocial gambling screen. They have to, and if they answer 1 or 2 of those, then they are automatically referred for a session with the gambling counselors. And so many of them have figured out not to answer yes, because they're smart people. But then we ask them again at 30 days. And sometimes they're a little more reticent at the beginning and a little more open in the next 30 days. So they are to be asked twice about that. And I'd say 40% of the people that we have in treatment in Iowa right now have come out of the SUD and mental health ranks. Okay? So, we also did this new thing called the stages of change. How many of you know those? Because that's been around for a while. And how many of you use the stages of change? Well, in the state of Iowa and many other states around the country, they're required to use the stages of change not only for their gambling issue, but the rest of the issues that go along with their life, because gambling just doesn't affect one part of your life. It just doesn't affect your finances. It affects your families and your emotional states, et cetera, et cetera. And so we are requiring them to, on their intake, every section, look at the stage of change. Are they willing to make a change? Do they need to make a change in this area? Are they willing to make a change in this area? Where do they fit? Do they fit on the pre-contemplation, the contemplation? Are they doing what they need to do now? And that's how, one of the ways that we make decisions on keeping them. Are they working with in all areas of their life, or do they just say things like, if I could, just help me to stop gambling and I'll be fine? Okay, well, we know that doesn't work. It's a holistic process. So we're using those things. And we started out thinking that gamblers were degenerates, that willpower was the key. Does this sound like substance use many, many years ago? When I first met my wife 18 years ago, I told her I was a gambling counselor, and she said, I really don't understand that. Why don't they just stop? Now, my wife is a veterinarian, and she's used to diagnosis, prognosis, plan. She sees your cat, and she figures out what's wrong, what to do, and how to do it. okay? And she's used to that, but when it came to working with gamblers, she thought, I don't really get this. I don't really understand this, and why don't they just stop? And in many of our early therapy, people that were working in therapy were on the same opinion. Well, today's the last day that you gamble. Okay? And so the first year, I was the state director for gambling, and the first year this program came back and they said they had a 100% success rate. And I'm like, I got to get to that program and find out what they're doing, because what they're doing is so much different than what everybody else is doing. Okay? So I went there and I said, well, how is it that you get 100%? They said, well, we tell them the very first day they come in, this is the last day you're gambling, and from now on, you are off the bet. Okay? And nobody told us they were all gambling. So I did some focus groups, because that's what I was, a state director. So I did some focus groups, and I asked the question, how many of you gambled in treatment? And like most of them said yes. And I said, well, why did you not tell people that you gambled? And they said, because they told us this was the last day, and we didn't want to get in trouble. That's where we were. The sports gambler, one of the sports gamblers I had that I just started working with about a month and a half ago, he said to me, he said, you know, I'm a gambling degenerate. Now this was a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. He said, I'm a gambling degenerate. And what would you say to a person who says to you, I'm a gambling degenerate? I hear crickets. Well, that was a good question. What is a degenerate to you? And he answered that question because I did. I said, what does that mean? And he said, well, you know, I have used everyone and used everything, and I just can't stop gambling. There's no hope for me. I'm a degenerate. So the first thing I said was, we will not use that language ever again. I'm not that directive all the time, but I am with that. This is a disorder, not a state. He's not a degenerate. He's got a problem. He's got an issue. It needs to be dealt with. We moved him from he having his finances to his dad taking care of his finances. We've moved a lot of the things, and he has stopped. He wanted to stop badly. He just didn't believe he could. And so because I'm retired, he has to text me every day with what he did and what he's doing with his world, so that I know and he knows that we're working on his gambling issue. Because many people see their clients or their patients once a week. Would you realize that's 1 hour of working on gambling? And how many hours are left in the week? Truckloads. 1 hour versus the entire rest of his week. And he's not strong enough to make it through without thinking about recovery. So he said to me yesterday, he says, you know, I played golf, and I said, did you bet? He said, no. He said, for the first time, he told his golf mates that he was in treatment for gambling. He said, that was hard. He said, but they all seem to understand. And I said, yeah, you're your worst critic. When it comes, it's your shame that's carrying you. So we moved on. So, and you see that Las Vegas is Sin City. It still is. If you talk to the people that don't live here, we all say, well, Las Vegas is Sin City. I don't know why we say that. Did you guys make that up, or did we? And what was Sin City in the 80s is now an entertainment center of the United States. You see how we've changed the way we act and react around gambling? In 1980, it was a sin. In 2024, it's part of culture. Okay, so we now know that gambling is a brain disease. We know that. It turns out that the pleasure centers and the amygdala work together to continue to have you gamble. If you get going, your pleasure centers go firing off, and they're through the roof, and your dopamine and your other chemicals, because I've lost them, because I'm not having them right now, they go through the roof. The upper part of your brain that does cognitive thinking shuts down, and your fight or flight part of your amygdala lights up. We know that. And when we talk about fight or flight, we're talking about people who go to the casino or go to the scratch-offs or do whatever they're doing, and when you bet your $40 and walk out the door, they see it as a fight to get your money and their money back. Okay? That's what we mean by fight or flight. They're not running, they're fighting. Okay? It's not always pleasurable, but it's what they do. And they don't have the ability when the cognitive part of their brain shuts down, they don't have the ability to make the right decision at the right time. And so most of treatment is now working from fight or flight and impulsiveness to cognitive thinking again, to thinking on a higher level. That's not an easy thing to do. Most of us do that every single day. Now, here's the example. Guy or gal sees a sign out there that says, Harris Casino is having a party. Now, you see that sign, you say, wow, sounds fun, but I got to go to my son's baseball game. And you make the decision to go to the son's baseball game. As opposed to the person that has a gambling issue, whose cognitive part of their brain is shut down. They're having a party at Harris. I must go. And they're there. And they don't sometimes even know how they got there. So we know that it's a brain. We know that there are some chemicals that help, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. But when we talk about these, the dopamine, the serotonin, the neurotransmitters that help the pleasure centers, those fire and fire and fire. And one of the difficulties of treatment around that is, how do you get them to fire their pleasure centers that aren't gambling related? Not an easy thing to do, because when we did research about 20 years ago, and we talked about people who had both cocaine issue and gambling issue, and they said cocaine was easier to stop using than gambling, because gambling was a better high. And we all know that cocaine is like one of those I'm indestructible kind of people when I'm on it. And gambling's a higher high than that. So how do you get them to stop the higher highs? Because you're never going to get that again. You know, you don't tell them to say, well, it's time to jump out planes. That doesn't work. So you have to begin the process of retraining the brain and the serotonins to pop and go off for other things. Right now, one of my gamblers, he's in the middle of a divorce, and you know, like all divorces, okay, that was an overstatement. Like some divorces, then it becomes about the children, and he's like, I need to see my children more often than once a week and every other weekend kind of thing. And I said, well, why don't you go to their sports events, and why don't you go to their events at school, and why don't you become a parent instead of a gambler? And I didn't say it quite that way. Please understand. Sometimes I'm a lot more eloquent. But he started going to his children's events, and now he sees them about 3 or 4 times a week. And he's not making noise about how often he sees his children anymore, because he's made an inroad, and he says it's great. And the other thing he did, he started to take up these Lego things. you know, those Legos that we had as kids that we all step on as parents, and we hate that? Well, he said, you know, I'm really interested in Legos. So now he's putting together like ships and buildings and things like that, and it keeps him from thinking about his gambling. So he's changed the way that his pleasure centers fire. That, by the way, that took 3 treatments. He had to steal money first, and then he had to get in trouble with like $50,000 with the bookie second, and now his third time is that his wife has left him. Took him 3 times. But now he seems to be better. So what does the admission data tell us? It tells us that in 1998, which is when the data started being collected, that 59% of the people were male and 41% were female. Mostly males, and not a lot of Class 3 gaming was outside of Iowa, so there was just several casinos and scratch-offs and bingos and things like that. And we did most of our marketing to the male population because those are the people that were coming in. They were coming in, and they are the ones we saw. And most gamblers entered in what Custer's called his hopeless stage, and what we call the most severe stage now. And our success ratios were not very good. In the 2000s to 2003, males 55, females 45. Generally the same, but women were starting to come to treatment in the early 2000s. They were beginning to come, and they were different than our male sports gamblers and horse track players. They were different. They were coming in, and they had used gambling as a coping mechanism. So gambling made them feel better in a world that they didn't feel good in. Okay? So they started coming in, and they started trickling in as the 2000s started. 2003 to 2007, you can see those statistics, and women are starting to come in at more and more rates. 46%, we were at 41, now we're at 46 or 47%. That's good. And what happened in 2003 is slots were introduced in Iowa. And most of the people that came in from 2003 on were slot machine players. Different than horse track players. In 2008 to 2010, and then to 2023, because it's basically all the same, we have gone from more men entering treatment to more women entering treatment. Now women are coming to treatment. What's changed? What's different? Any ideas what's different between 2010 and 2023? What's changed? What's that? Slot machines over table games. They were more economically equal. I didn't say totally equal, I said more economically equal. But what they were is able to come to treatment because we marketed them, because we spent many years between 2008 and 2023 training everyone on people who came in on slot machines, because that's the people who were coming in. So all of our training for the last 15 years has been basically on how slot machine players look like, act like, feel like, and do. And so we're getting better at working with people that have slot machine problems. Okay? So if you get a success, then they tell somebody, and then more people come in. And then when we started doing things like looking at in the mental health and the SUD programs, and the women are more likely to say yes on those questions than the men. So they are referred to more treatment. So more women are coming in. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's just a thing. It's just the way it is. Okay? Slot machines, table games, and slot machines, for many, many years, we said slot machines the most addictive because it was the fastest game. Okay? Speed counts when it comes to addiction with gambling. Speed counts. And there's nothing faster than a slot machine. You can play 8 times a minute or 11 times a minute. I don't know. You guys, one of you guys are the industry people. How fast can you play a slot machine if you just touch it? I don't know. I've never really actually tried to go as fast as possible. That really just doesn't feel good to me. Yeah. Yeah, its speed of play, it's been regulated as time goes on, so it's slowed it down, but it's still fast until recently. And what's changed recently? Online sports. Fastest form of gambling there is right now. And why? How is that? Isn't it just whether that the what's the name of your Golden Knights beat the Rangers? Nope. Panthers. Didn't you guys play the Panthers? I don't know. But you lost. You won last year. You won it all. But this year you just didn't make it. What's that? Stars? Dallas? You got beat by a Texas team? How could you be beat by a Oh, never mind. So anyway, not only can you bet on who's winning, you can bet on what each player is going to do. You can also bet inside each game, every play, every moment of every game. What's that? Well, yeah, but if you're a sports gambler, what's the first thing you're going to do? Invest in. I'm investing in. So now we've gone from slot machine players being the ones that get in trouble the fastest to sports gamblers getting in trouble the fastest because of the in-game processes. And people like FanDuel or what are some of the others? Just checking to see who knows. DraftKings. And some of those others, they are leading the charge with that, okay? But they're not the only ones doing that. You can do in-games with other entities. You can do it with entities that are at the casinos, or you can do them with other people who aren't associated with casinos. Not here? Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. But everybody else in the country can use your people or anybody else's, as long as it's online. Okay. Some of them can only use, like Iowa can. They're supposed to only legally use their only Iowa people. But anyway, so let's talk about entering treatment. The people that are entering treatment. I only got a couple of minutes, and we had basically age groups. We went from 60% were 45 and older in 2012 to then we went to 55% of the people were under 45 coming into treatment. We've reduced the age of people coming into treatment. Why is that? Access. We went from having Vegas and Atlantic City to Dubuque, Iowa. So here's the debt ratio. You can see the two that I have highlighted, over $100,000 to $250,000. 12% of the people that are coming in are over $100,000 in debt. So, as a person who works with gambling, how are you going to help them with $100,000 worth of debt? How many of you? No, I don't raise your hand. How many of you make that? Okay. So when you think about that, we've had to change the way we think because debt's getting more. Games. The games have been played. Internet. COVID moved the internet up, and it moved scratch-offs up. So COVID completely changed the way we are gambling now. It's another one of those effects. COVID has moved everybody online. I don't want to talk about that. So who pays for treatment? Because this is important. Who pays for treatment? So people naturally say, well, the state pays for treatment. Well, not necessarily. When the DSM came out and it moved it into a process addiction, it became one of those things that has to be covered under insurance. Now, not all your insurance regulators and your insurance state people have bought into that yet, but it is real. In fact, 50% of the people who came for the last couple of years to treatment in Iowa had their own insurance, because the state of Iowa mandates that every insurance agency cover it. And if yours doesn't, you should be talking to the insurance commission every single day. So when we ask them, do you think your gambling treatment's covered? They said no, and it turns out it is. But they just didn't know that. And so the last thing I want to talk about is medications. We've talked about naltrexone, but each time I want to talk about NAC. I refuse to give this up, and it probably will get me not invited back to many places. NAC, N-acetylcysteine. It's a supplement. You can get it at the health food store. It helps cravings. Dr. John Grant did a study. 83% of the responders reduced levels or stopped gambling because the cravings went away. It was repeated, 83% for an additional 6 weeks. And this is an effective process. And it's a supplement. And it tastes like a horse pill. Oh my God, it's horrible. So my recommendation, don't chew it. But it is an effective tool. And I have all of my people, I give the information to them, I give the research to them, and I say, you might want to try this. And they say, well, I can't afford it. I said, it's $11 a month. Now, how does that compare to naltrexone? Or as we were talking about yesterday, the wonder drug Ozempic. Which, by the way, I'm on Ozempic, so I'm really safe from being a gambling problem now. It turns out. I found that out yesterday. I'm really happy about that. So where are we going? Where are we going next? What is our plan for treating people? What's next? Well, we know a couple of things. Everybody's going online. We've got to get online. We've got to get with the gaming people, not necessarily with the gambling people, with the gaming people. We got to get them on board with us. And then what's after that? Does anybody know what's after the gaming craze? Anybody know? Anybody have any ideas what's on? Well, let me suggest to you that the industry does. The industry's working to the next generation of gaming and the next process and the next process. They think like that. We don't. We think like whoever shows up to us, we'll treat. We should stop thinking like that. We should start thinking about how are we going to prepare our workforce for the next 20 years. I'm not going to be doing the training because I really don't get gaming. I don't get it. That's why Jeremy's coming. That's why Janet's coming. Because I don't get it. The reason I retired wasn't because I was, ready to stop working. It's because I don't get gaming. I don't get it. I get sports gambling. I get that. I mean, I'm an ex-athlete. You wouldn't know that because now I've taken up eating as a hobby. But I get sports gambling. I don't get gaming. And so find someone who does and get trained on gaming and how to treat gamers, because that's the next 10 years. What's after that, I can't tell you. But I do know that there will be more treatment. The GRID Act, not necessarily its present form, but some future form will probably get passed, and the federal government will get involved in research and treatment, et cetera. It'll come down through SAMHSA, et cetera. We'll have our battles with that, but there will be funds in the future. We are not going to have to struggle like we used to have to struggle. I mean, I remember my first grant being $30,000, and I thought, how am I going to treat gamblers on $30,000 a year? And the money that the people got this year in Iowa is 75. We haven't gotten any better. We're still behind. We don't have enough money. The GRID Act will help. States will probably have to match like they do the block grants. And so we'll go from millions of $0 basically to millions of dollars. So be ready for that. It's coming. The council can help you with the training, with all that, and when the money comes in the next, I'm guessing, the way Congress works, I used to be a lobbyist in DC, 7 years. If you're still around in 7 years, the money's going to be coming. I'll pass it in 5, and it takes 2 years for the government to actually get it up and going. State government's 1 year, federal government's 2 years. So I show you this because not all gamblers come in the same form. This is a tree. How many of you have seen this tree before? It's outstanding. I saw it in Hawaii. And then I saw this tree a while back too. Not all gamblers come in the same way, and we need to treat them differently. And they are in fact the most special people that I've ever treated in my life. They are a challenge, and I tell my son, he finished college and he was going to be a psychologist, and he said, no, I think I'm going to rehab houses. And I said, I'll tell you what, you do whatever you want to do, but do what makes you happy. And this job has made me happy for 38 years. So thank you. I appreciate it.